now announced yesterday children will no longer be prescribed puberty-blocking drugs on the NHS in England, thanks to landmark new guidelines coming into place at the end of this month. Joining me right now is journalist and teacher Debbie Hayton. Debbie, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, I have to say, I mean, this has been a long time coming. This announcement comes, it's going to be from the end of this month. It's only NHS England doing that. So, of course, Wales, Scotland, they're going to be able to carry on. And we know that those the governments in those countries, those parts of this country, have been rather more into this stuff. But we also know that private clinics will still be able to have these drugs. But can we at least welcome this as a start down the road of sanity and morality and evidence-based, scientific and medical treatment coming back into fashion?
Yes, we should welcome this. It's been a long time coming, though. It's 2 years since the Cass review started to report, and these issues were consulted on last year. So it's been a long time coming, but we should be pleased at long last that the NHS England has decided that this is not something that should be routinely prescribed to children. But as you said, there are worries that's still outstanding.
Yeah, indeed. And lots of people who think, oh, for goodness sake, this is only a handful of people. It's not. It used to be a few hundred who were referred to the Tavistock Clinic, which was, the main trans clinic for children in this country a few years back. It's now in the thousands, and it's massively changed from being largely boys to being largely teenage girls. Now, that suggests, as a lot of people have thought, there's a lot of, should we say, social contagion that is going on. Certain schools, one girl goes to this sort of treatment, and then suddenly there's an explosion in it. Now, there are big concerns about this. You've expressed a lot of concerns about this. Now, you yourself, you are a trans-identifying man. You live as a trans woman. You're very, very, very clear, though, that you're very clear on this, you're still, biologically, you are a man, and that we need to have open debate about this without everyone shouting transphobe at everybody. And yet we know from the Cass report, we know from lots of investigations, lots of whistleblowers at the main clinic, the Tavistock in North London, that anyone who spoke out about this, even, a year ago, a few years ago, 20 years ago, this goes back, and say, I'm not sure these drugs are good for children. I think the side effects, the long-term impact of them, fertility, being basically made infertile, losing ability to have any sexual arousal and things like that, that these things affect on brain development, bone density, even there's concerns about liver cancer now, that these drugs are experimental, they are not safe, they have very, very, very many harms, they have questionable benefits, and they should not be prescribed en masse to troubled children. And yet those people basically were hounded out of their jobs.
Yes, it's dreadful. It's appalling. And what's still appalling is the fact that even though the NHS has said what they said yesterday, there's still the possibility of clinical trials. We shouldn't be trialling these drugs. They've had long enough to trial them. Perhaps the Tavistock Clinic should have done some follow-up studies years ago, but they never did that. Then there's the issue of Scotland and Wales, and then there's the issue of private providers, which is my biggest concern of all, that over the last couple of years, waiting lists for NHS provision they've just mushroomed, and private providers have jumped in to fill that gap. And there's nothing yesterday which suggests to me that private providers will not be prohibited from filling that gap and providing those drugs to families who can pay. That's the concern, and that's my worry.
Absolutely, and even having even less oversight of it, although I don't think you can have less oversight than we've seen at the Tavistock Clinic. Now, it was the case of Kira Bell, who was a young woman who believed that she was trans, was put on this road of the puberty blockers, and she had a mastectomy, and that, again, basically her body was mutilated, her perfectly healthy body was mutilated, when she was young. She then brought a High Court case, basically saying, it was not possible for me to have been able to give consent as a child to this sort of procedure and these long-term impacts. She has detransitioned since. And like many young women who have gone through this process, who are coming forward again and again, are saying, actually, I think the issue was I was actually gay. I am gay. That is the issue I was struggling with or wasn't aware of. And I was sent down this route that, you think you might be trans because you've seen something on YouTube, or a friend has suggested this to you, or a doctor suggested it. And then you go down this route. And we've been told in the public that puberty blockers there was something that would sort of, stop puberty from developing too much and therefore it would give teenagers time to make a decision, to see what they wanted, and that, you know, that it was that what's the harm there? But actually, there are huge harms. As I say, brains, you know, development, and the fact that they have basically become sort of the first step on a sort of a railway road directly to full transitioning, surgery, and their lives being and bodies irrevocably changed.
Well, yes, the report suggested that it was a treadmill. And let's face it, which children want to be put on pause while all their friends go through puberty? The clamour for cross-sex hormones to follow those puberty blockers must have been enormous. And what we saw was reports saying that it was almost a 100% carry-through. So it was never a pause to think. It was the first step on this conveyor belt through to cross-sex hormones and then possible infertility and lifelong medical problems. It's shocking, it really is. We're looking at a service which traditionally has dealt with middle-aged men who wanted to become women, and then suddenly this cohort of teenage girls appeared who were perhaps not happy about what was expected of them as women. And the truth is that these are two completely separate groups.
Yeah.
And the travesty is that NHS Gender Services fused the two together and said that it was a single condition, gender dysphoria. And I think we need to pull that apart and say just what is actually going on here, because there's a number of possible conditions, and what's been happening was not the best way of treating them.
No, indeed. And there was, you know, absolute hysteria that greeted anyone who criticised this. You know, whistleblowers, as I say, lost their jobs. Everyone shouts the word transphobe about this. And then we know, you know, the parents of these troubled children are told, if you don't allow them to start on these drugs and go down this route, they're going to commit suicide because they're so unhappy. And actually, you know, the stats didn't bear that out at all anyway. And an awful, terrible thing to say to a parent of a troubled child. But the thing that I find extraordinary is that these drugs, you know, they're saying, you know, clinical trials now. There weren't any proper clinical trials. They just started giving these drugs. They weren't proven to be safe. I mean, parents get told off for giving too much Calpol to their children, for goodness sake. And then they were giving these body-altering, mind-altering, huge therapy drugs to children without proper you know, clinical research. They're going to carry on doing that, it would seem. And they didn't, as you say, they didn't look at the long-term impact whatsoever. There wasn't actually a study that carried on, you know, 10 years, 20 years, what happened, what was the reaction? They didn't do any follow-up on people who detransitioned. I mean, you can only think they didn't want to know the answers. And why didn't they want to know the answers? Because they knew what they were doing was wrong, and they did it anyway. Do you think eventually we will lead to see people going to jail? Do you think, I mean, I've always thought there's going to be massive court cases on this, but do you think that, you know, we need to actually face up that this has been government overlooking it and allowing it to happen, NHS senior figures, doctors doing this, this has actually been mass child abuse, and it's gone on publicly under our watch?
It has, and what's worse is that people have been calling this out for several years now. It's not new what's happening this year. People have been calling it out for a while, and those people have been ignored. As you said, they've been thrown out of their jobs, they've been written off as transphobes, bigots, all sorts of horrible names has been thrown at people. Looking forwards, the first issue is that this needs to stop. There needs to be no more clinical trials. There's been enough use of these drugs, and if the NHS has not kept proper records of then that's their problem. No more children need to be harmed at all by this. Looking back at the people who have been involved in this, a number of people are going to have some very hard questions to answer over the next few years.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. You've been a fantastic spokesperson on this issue and speaking out on it. Thank you so much, Debbie Hayton. Still with me is Benedict Spence, last couple of moments of the show. This has been an absolute travesty, what's happened, and it's involved children, often very troubled children, children on the autism spectrum. Again, particularly, I'm really particularly concerned about, you know, young lesbian teenagers who just are troubled and think they're in a homophobic family, and then, you know, basically doing horrible things to their bodies.
Children who, by definition, are vulnerable, and amongst them the most vulnerable in that cohort are the ones that have suffered. But I can't get particularly sort of animated about this new decision because it's simply a temporary reprieve. It can still be, you know,
think it will
people
still
can
carry on?
still access it in other parts of the United Kingdom. And I do really feel that the Labour Party, once they come in, they will row back in any kind of pressure, and it will become part of what they call the right-wing culture wars, which is they'll say you're a bigot if you don't allow us.
Well,
to
they
do
want
this.
conversion therapy, ban on conversion therapy, to include even saying to someone, maybe you're not trans, maybe you're gay, or maybe you're troubled by something else. But this is ideological for these people. They're not looking at scientific evidence. But again, neither does the government, as we know, on many policies.
Such progress had to be made to get to a point where young gay children were not told there's something wrong with you, and we're back to that position.
We absolutely are.